Hi, you find me in the beautiful mess that is my studio, that is the spare room, that is the office and the laundry room. And we want to talk today about 3 different embroidery books that I think are really useful to have. The 3 books I've chosen cover 3 different purposes. One is a project book, one is a reference book, and one is a kind of inspirational book. I recommend getting one each of these, or when you get started with embroidery, looking for a mixture, because you'll need something that you can refer to, something that will give you lots of projects that you're going to enjoy doing, and then another one that will give you some inspiration so that you can think about how to do things that might be your own creation. We'll start with the project book, and the project book I've suggested is called Edgy Embroidery by Renee Rominger. I really like this book for several reasons. The designs are very much to my aesthetic and taste. There you go, there's one of them. And I really like the way that the book is constructed. It's quite thoughtful. The reason I like it is it has a beginner section, but the beginner section is not too long. I have bought lots and lots of embroidery books over the years, and all of them, with very few exceptions, have a bit at the beginning that tells you how to get started, because they're basing it on the idea that whoever bought the book may not know how to do the basics. Perfectly understandable. But when you've bought several of these books and you've been sewing for a long time, you tend to skip that part. Now that's fine, and some books do a better job of the beginner's basics than others. My complaint is when I buy a book that's relatively expensive and they spend a lot of time going through the basics to the point where you've paid for something that you didn't really bargain for, which is a lot of pages you're just never going to use. This one has the basics, but it's only a few pages long. They basically cover the getting the fabric into the hoop, transferring designs, and then that's more or less it. There's a little bit about the materials, of course, but it's a small percentage of the overall book. What the author does then is they go through step by step each stitch that they think is useful for you to learn as an embroiderer. They go through the basics of that stitch, and then they have a particular project that they've created to practice that stitch. So for example, this is the back stitch project. So immediately you're mastering a stitch, but you're also learning as you go without being completely overwhelmed with brand new stitches, which as a beginner is really helpful, I think. Some books, they want to give you all of the stitches at the beginning, and then they give you all of these different projects, and often they'll have different types of stitches, and you can get a little bit overwhelmed trying to flip forward to learn a stitch and then trying to incorporate it into your project. So this book was a real inspiration for me when I created my tutorials that I provide on the YouTube channel here, because I decided to do a similar kind of thing where I picked a stitch and then created a design so that you're just practicing that stitch. And they've done the same thing. Rominger's done the same thing here. When you get more complicated, the designs get a little bit more intricate too. So you're building as you go. It's a really great one. Now this is easy enough to find secondhand, and you can also buy it brand new. The next one I'm going to suggest is a reference book. And this is my favourite one, the DMC Book of Embroidery by Melinda Cross. It's a very old book. There are projects in the book, and they follow a similar kind of principle to the Edgy Embroidery book, in that that the stitches are divided up, and then you get to do projects that practice the stitches that you're learning. I don't tend to do the projects in this book because they're quite dated and quite kind of twee, and they're not to my taste. But it's an excellent book because it has so many, as it says, over 100 different stitches in here. And the way they're divided up is into groups. So they go through the basic stitches, back stitch, chain stitch, blanket stitch is the first section. And then the sections that come after that are based on kind of the groups that they fall into. So there's lace stitch, there's the knotted family, and so on. which means you get to learn lots of different types of stitches. At the beginning of each section, if I can find it, is a sampler so that you can see how all the different stitches can be used. So for example, this is the knotted stitch family, and there's a sampler here that kind of looks like a really cool aerial garden picture, and then down here is the key, so you can look at all the different types of knotted stitches and how they might be used in a project. So I find this a very good resource. I've had it for years. I mean, and when I say years, I think it's over 20. I don't think I will ever part with this book. And so I recommend something like that, where you've got a reference guide for lots of different stitches, which you can use. For example, if you download a project, an embroidery project online that's free, and they tell you what stitches to use, but the instructions are not that helpful, you need a reference to go by. The final book I want to show you is Slow Stitch, and this is by Claire Wellesley Smith. This book is what got me back into embroidery and back into sewing after a little bit of time not doing it. I'm not quite sure why I ended up buying it, but I did, and I looked through it and I was completely inspired and really thrilled. Her way of approaching fibre art is, I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly unusual in that she talks a lot about process over product, or over the finished item, and I really enjoy that. I think it's fantastic. What she's trying to do is encouraging people a love of the actual activity of sewing, rather than focusing on what the design looks like at the end. And so it becomes a mindfulness and contemplative activity. The other aspect to this that I really enjoy is she is quite focused on environmentally friendly practices, reusing items, and also using natural dyes. So for example, here we've got a nice sort of tutorial on slow dyeing, and if you've seen any of the stuff that I've done on slow dyeing, I often use this method that she's got here. The pictures are really beautiful. Here's a piece on Cantha, which I'd love to do a tutorial on soon. This is about visible mending. And in it, she also, if you can see, she features several fibre artists who do these techniques. And I think it's just a great book to look through. I find it very inspiring. Here she's got a section on reflective and mindful practice. And I find that this book is really valuable to me as a fibre artist, but also as someone who's trying to develop a fibre art business. It's very easy to lose sight of why you sew when you're doing it as a business. And it's so important to get things done and made so that you're building your repertoire of projects. And sometimes it's really hard to just remember why you want to do this in the first place. Not to say that I don't enjoy the business side of it, because I absolutely do. But sometimes I have to kind of just pick up a project that has nothing to do with open coven, and it might be something for my daughter, or it might be just something for myself, and work on it so that I don't always feel like it's about the product or the business. And this book is a good reminder of that if you're not enjoying what you're doing, then that's a problem. And of course, that's something that we need to address in society as a whole, and not to go on too much about it. But I think we're beginning to learn more and more that we need to find ways to enjoy the short time we have in this particular realm. And this is a good reminder of that. And so Slow Stitch by Claire Wellesley Smith is a great one. She's also brought out another one called The Resilient Stitch, which I haven't got yet. But this kind of idea of using different processes has really inspired me and inspired a lot of my workshops that you'll find on the website.